Hello, I think this is broadcasting now, so I'm here with, is your name pronounced Iseth?
Is it original? Yes.
Iseth Original. Well, that's a mouthful. Yeah,
It's
so
meant to be
we're
like that. It's by design.
Iseth the Original, and we're here today to talk about skepticism, the perspectives of the universe that secularism has, the current state of secularism, the approaches that skepticism has towards culture, epistemology, metaphysics, all that interesting stuff. So I'm just going to start off by letting you introduce yourself, and then I'll just ask you some questions about your channel, your perspective on the world. Maybe we can take some questions from the chat after the conversation develops a little bit. We can sort of explore the philosophical questions as they come up. So I guess perhaps you can introduce yourself.
So I'm Iseth Original. I have a YouTube channel, which is pretty much a copycat of Logic's, which is allowed because he gave me the puppet for it, so play. I usually debunk religious stuff, dogmatic stuff. I generally don't have a problem with religious itself, but with a lot of the dogmatic issues concerning religion and a lot of the, let's say, harmful ideologies inside of certain religions as well. And I recently went for some UFO stuff as well. So that's more or less what I do.
So what do you consider, can you just perhaps explain what you consider to be the harmful ideologies inside of religion?
So the thing is the following. I was raised Catholic. I was living in several different places. I was living in the Netherlands, I was living in Germany, I was living in Austria, I was living in Italy. In Italy, I was living quite a long time. And they are very dogmatic. I was also living in Poland. So I had quite a bit of an idea of how people think and why they think that way. And something that is very, very common, no matter where you go, there are certain things that people just take for granted. And they don't really have a reason for it. They just take it for granted. And some of those ideas are very, very harmful. For example, in Italy, when I was in Italy, back then it was still allowed to go drinking alcohol when you are 14 years old. Right?
So the age of
the age of alcohol, the age of consumption. And then you saw all these 14-year-old girls going out to those discotheques and pubs, and they had a cut-off hour. You know, they said, we don't want children below the age of 16 inside of our club. Therefore, you know, the other club, you know, that actually lets you in, that would stop at midnight. So everyone, or one. And so everyone had to go home who was below 16, and the other ones could jump into the other club. So it was kind of working like that.
So you would think that a very high alcohol consumption age like 21 that we have in the United States is more reasonable?
Aside from the fact that it is more reasonable, because of the fact that it is Italy, which means it is, you know, it's 3/4 coast. That means you have a lot of immigration coming in. And so as a result, you have a lot of people who have very different ideas, which means you have 30-year-old, or you had, because now they fixed it somewhat. You had 30-year-old immigration guys, you know, who came over with, you know, a couple of ships ago.
Recent immigrants.
Standing there preying on those completely drunk 14-year-old girls and boys. That was very, very harmful. And everyone was just like, well, yeah, but, you know, just don't wear a mini and it will be fine. And there you go. And that was just such a stupid way of thinking.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems to me that it would be a large degree, a large amount of the wisdom of this policy would depend on the specific culture that governs it, right? And you see, sort of in the United States, you have a lot of cultures that can't handle alcohol either, and it has nothing to do really with the age. It has everything to do with the sort of culture that surrounds drinking, and in particular, drinking with men trying to pick up or have sex with younger girls, which is oftentimes just like it's the vector of pathology you were yourself mentioning there, right?
Yeah, you know, the thing is, it had its positive sides because a lot of young girls, basically already at the age of 12, knew exactly how to handle adult guys they didn't want to, you know, interact with. But the problem is, if you go above a certain level of alcohol, you do no longer have this kind of, you know, savviness. You can no longer control yourself that well. So that's, you know, completely falls flat.
Yeah, I mean, but it doesn't it strike you? Well, I don't know. This is a little bit of a tangent, but to me, it sort of strikes me that the sexual culture is the biggest problem, not the alcohol, right? I mean, I know 13-year-old girls who have no guards against older men trying to take advantage of them, regardless of what their blood alcohol content was.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you allow people to drink at such a young age, because at that age you don't really reason too well, people will be reckless. They will be reckless older as well. But with 14 years, you can't expect these people. You can't expect them to be, reasonable about how much they want to drink, what they want to do, and so on and so forth. And so, if you then shove all this alcohol in their face, it's just the dot on the I. I mean, generally,
do you think this is a problem before there were these older men looking for these women to take advantage of?
I am not quite sure because I don't know that well the culture from before, but I am aware of the fact that the locals have a very, very low instance of doing this. So
I know. I mean, for instance, I have a hard time imagining that if you went back to Italy, in the 19th century or early 20th century, right, when it was much more traditional, I really doubt you would have seen women getting drunk and falling into the arms of predatory men. I mean, I'm sure that happened to a certain degree in
but not as much. Yeah, absolutely.
But in Florence and in northern Italy, which I know I have some friends there, I know that a little bit in southern Italy, they would have had their daughters locked down.
Yes.
Unless you were intending to actually marry the woman, there's no way you would have gotten 3 drinks into her. No way in an Italian family. To me, it seems this is much more of a cultural issue. I think it seems to me that alcohol is a little more of a scapegoat, but not that I think that alcohol, it could improve the problem. We do have to see, right?
Well, the thing is, for example, it is for certain cultures, it is very common to give children or toddlers coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you can say, well, that's not really good for them. You can say, who cares? There is a reason they give it to them, but whether or not it is good or bad, they don't know about it. Like, they just do because the ancestors did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when they say, yeah, why shouldn't we just let the girls go out? Our forefathers did it and so on, and, it's just a village and everyone is fine with it.
Didn't do it, right?
But that's the point. I'm not sure that they didn't.
The forefathers didn't. Italian forefathers did not let their 13-year-old daughters go out to clubs with single men.
No, they don't let them go out with single men. They let them go out with their friends, with the girls' friends.
Well, but there was this cultural chaperone system that would keep them away from men who would perhaps prey on them sexually.
I don't know.
Well, maybe. I don't know. To me, it seems much more. I mean, I think that culture is kind of an interesting perspective because, a lot of what I talk about on my channel is sort of the decline of traditional culture and a lot of the problems that have erupted in the wake of the decline of traditional culture. And what you pointed out was a very prime example of that, right? Just what do we do in these situations? Like the situation you're bringing up, it's similar in American universities to a large degree.
Well, American universities seem to me to be a bit the other way, though. Where it's like the women drink too much, but then they basically have sex and regret it, and therefore they feel like they were raped, which is completely the opposite way.
No, I think it's the symptom is you do not want to have a large number of women drinking in an area where they can be taken advantage of sexually. I mean, it creates situations where women regret what they've done and they feel very psychologically disturbed, and maybe they lash out by essentially creating, rightfully or unright, or you get situations where women are just raped, right? And I'm not really qualified to tell you which situations are the ones where the accusations of rape are accurate, but I can tell you that generally it seems that the combination of these things, the sexual culture with alcohol, is incredibly detrimental, whether it's detrimental to women or to anyone else generally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the thing is, you basically mix in two things that were already present in the culture, whether or not it was more common or it's more common now, and it was less common in the past. I think they changed a lot already. Just the laws changed already, because before it was more like, okay, if you got because you have to think Italy was more like North Africa than like Europe, than like the rest of Europe. It got more Europeified in the past. So when you go back to the 1960s, which is quite a long time ago, but before the 1960s, they had honor marriages where it was like, if some guy assaulted you, in order to keep the honor of the family, you had to kind of marry the guy, So he would, save his punishment by marrying you and so on. Like, I don't quite think that it's just from like, today, yesterday, modern world. I really think that the origin is because drinking is something Italians did ages and a half ago already. Wine is just something they really like. Obviously, nowadays they have a bit heavier alcohol and they're not really good with it, but they did have alcohol since always and forever, basically.
To me, the thing that changed with the sexual culture, right? The sexual culture changed.
The sexual culture didn't really change that much either, I don't think.
Really?
Because
from the 60s? If it didn't, it would be massively different than America, because American sexual culture.
Partially what we got taught in school back, because we have this carnevale, right? This carnevale where basically they had to implement the celibacy for the priests because they had too many illegitimate children, right?
Priestly celibacy, you mean? I don't see what
the Catholic Church.
Sexual culture for just
the Catholic Church had to implement celibacy because they had so many priests who had illegitimate children and they had to pay for it so much.
Well, the Catholic Church implemented celibacy in like the 6th century.
Yeah, but and then eventually they had this
that's more than
celebration
1,000 years ago.
Where but
then that happened 50 years ago, not 1,000 years ago.
Then the celebration, the Carnival celebration, basically had this weird, tradition to it that as long as the lover that you sleep with, which may not be your husband, has a mask on, it was allowed, which was a very, very odd thing.
Oh,
but so there was
I'm skeptical of hearing that. I've heard stories like this, but so wait, you're saying that there was functionally temple prostitution in Europe?
Temple prostitution?
Okay, maybe you should. No, sorry, maybe I misunderstood. What were you saying about this carnival thing?
It's basically a celebration once a year, right?
Yeah, it's like a Fool Day, right?
It's an April Fool Day.
Yeah.
And they had this period in history where basically people would get away with sleeping with the wrong person because it was that particular day.
I guess. I mean, I find it a little bit questionable. And maybe it happened once or twice, but the idea that adultery would essentially be legalized for a day in the 15th century seems to be pretty questionable.
If you look at the north of Europe, before they had Christianity coming up to them, they had this allowance that they could, I think it was in the Scandinavian countries especially, where they could divorce, because the first marriage was usually to get the families together. And then, they would divorce and they would just get another marriage that would actually work out for them.
Oh, I'm sure before Christianity, yeah.
And that was before Christianity. And then, throughout Christianity, they sort of had to at least give in to it somehow, because it wouldn't really work out otherwise.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the Catholic Church has not typically caved on divorce. This is one thing that's been remarkably consistent over time. So just historically speaking, it's lost countries over its arguments with divorce.
Yes.
So I don't know. I mean, like I know there have been stories that the Catholic and Christian sexual morality has been bent from time to time. I just think that these are.
I think you have to make a distinction.
I don't think there are any kind of consistent trend.
I think you have to make a distinction between the local culture of the people and Christianity.
I think you have to make a distinction between what was a weird story that happened one time and what actually happened as an ordinary as an ordinary, normal thing in European culture before the 1960s. Right? I mean, I'm not talking about like, oh, one time this one weird thing happened where, we turned a blind eye to adultery because it was April Fool's Day. I'm talking about what usually happened, right? How many lifetime partners did the average European woman have before the 19th century? Hello?
Yeah, I think we're kind of talking past each other because I don't quite understand your argument.
No, when I say sexual culture, I mean the average experience of a person living in these societies. Not like weird stories about something strange that happened once or a special allowance that was made for a king because, he had some particular political situation where no one could challenge him. On average, in Christian civilization, before the 1960s, women would have an incredibly small number of sexual partners before they got married. Usually 0, every now and again 1 or 2. But they wouldn't have a large number of sexual partners before they got married for the first time. And divorces were rarely granted. Even in Protestant countries. So to me, I'd say that I just think that I think there's a statistical case that there was a massive sexual culture change in the 1960s, right? For this particular point.
I don't know. I don't know.
It's worth it. I guess I kind of derailed us. I apologize.
Yeah, no, it's because the thing is, there are certain things that people take for granted. Because at the beginning we were talking about dogma, right? Yes. And there were things. My original point was there were things that people take for granted, and they don't really know why. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those things are just not good. Mm-hmm. And I just think if you have a certain idea, you might as well have a reason for it, a good reasoning for it, because otherwise you cannot defend it.
That's an interesting point, right? Because I think that you might recognize the icon on my channel is someone called G.K. Chesterton, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this famous story he told about the point you were just mentioning about tradition, right? Mm-hmm. And he says that imagine you're walking your cart along a road, and suddenly in the middle of the road you encounter this fence going through the road, right? For no apparent reason, and you have to walk your cart around the fence, right? So he said that an unwise man will say, I see no reason for this fence, so I'm going to tear the fence down. He said a wise man will first say, what was the reason for that fence to be erected? And once he understands the reason why the fence was put up to begin with, only then will he tear it down.
Yes.
Would you say that's a good statement to be made about tradition generally?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that's oftentimes the problem, right? I think oftentimes when we examine traditions in the past, especially religious traditions, because those come under a lot of fire from skeptics, I think a lot of the problem is that there seems to be a lack of understanding of why the traditions were put there to begin with.
Yes.
So I think when it comes to these things, I always want to understand first why the tradition was erected to begin with. Sorry, long story of saying that.
We agree there, I guess.
Okay.
Because, I don't quite know what to say.
No. It's
and also,
fine.
like with the whole promiscuity and the whole sexual part. As I said, these were all examples that I was taught in school. I cannot know whether or not they're right. This is stuff that I was taught. Okay.
About promiscuity being bad?
No, about promiscuity like that being in Italy in the first place.
Oh, being common. Oh, okay.
Yes. And that's why I was bringing it up, because otherwise I wouldn't even have brought it up. And the thing is, there are several things that I have learned in the past that I know nowadays that they're not correct, which is why I put it in this put in this caveat.
So what would the examples of those things be? Because I guess the thing is, I find it hard to believe because we see traditionalist societies like United States from the early 20th century, where we do have good statistical measures. And where we have good statistical measures, we see that there weren't a lot of lifetime sexual partners in women before the 60s. So I just use that as a measurement for what we could expect from other societies that were broadly European in their culture. But I'm sorry, let's. So I think we're coming to an interesting difference in our approaches to tradition, right?
Yeah.
I think that when we talk about these ideas, I think the question where a lot of people are asking right now, I think, is just how do you structure a secular society that sort of post-culture or multicultural, right? Or can you even do it, right? If any of these countries like Sweden, if Sweden becomes half Muslim, how do you organize Swedish society, or can you organize Swedish society that's half Muslim?
Well, I would say if Sweden wants to deal with a multicultural society, which it has to now, yes, the way they were approaching it until to this point is a complete utter failure. Because the thing that they had in mind was, the people come over and they will take over our values, and then they're all Swedish. Mm-hmm. Or at least, it seemed that way. And then the moment you realize the people come over and they stick to their own values, not everyone obviously, but quite a few do. The moment you see they stick to their values, your values, are kind of shaken, because it's like they're not the only values on the market anymore. So now you have to come up with a reason why your values are better. And if you cannot come up with that, over time, the other values will take over. Whether or not they're better doesn't matter. They just have the better arguments. Therefore, they will claim the people who are undecided.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, what it seems like you're saying is that commitment to an ideal or faith in your own culture is a good and valuable thing to have.
No, I say that if you have a good system that works well, a system that you like, a system that is, very, very good for your society, that you have basically to go back and see why it is good. And then you have to find very, very good reasoning that convinces other people, because you don't have to convince yourself. You like your system already. Whether you believe it's good because some deity thinks so, or you believe it's good because there are actual, physical things that you can see that make it better, doesn't matter as long as you are convinced it's good. But the point is,
why do you think that European societies have utterly failed at doing this over the last 40 years?
I think the reason they fail is because I think there are several reasons for that. Partially it's just this whole it doesn't matter which culture it is. Like, first, I think they were just in denial. First, it was just like, everyone takes over our culture and it will be fine. And then the people didn't take over their culture, and so they were like, well, yeah, well, we still want to be nice to those people, so maybe we can just get along with each other. Mm-hmm. And then eventually they had to come up with excuses of why they shouldn't just play bully and tell the other people to obey to their own rules. And if you look at, for example, places like Poland, who don't want to take immigrants, they still stick to their own ideologies, and that is partially because of the fact that they were under the Soviet Union.
It's also they're much more religious too.
I don't necessarily think that is connected, because there was, for example, someone who made the argument, which I found actually very interesting, that if you think about social justice warriors, when they say, yeah, well, our forefathers, they were colonialists, and through colonialism we messed up everything, and we are guilty of that. We inherited that guilt from our forefathers. That sounds an awful lot like Adam and Eve, red apple kind of territory.
Oh yeah, certainly. No, social justice itself it's a Christian heresy. I mean, so are most of the ideas we hold, secular or religious, are derived from Christian ideas. They're just one part of the Christian worldview, which has that's cut off from the whole Christian worldview and isolated, right?
Yeah. The problem we have now is the people get more and more secular. They don't believe in any deity anymore, more and more. And so instead
they don't believe in their own culture anymore either.
Yeah, but instead of taking the values that they have and just being like, okay, well, God is not there anymore, therefore, let's just throw everything out. What they should do instead is focus on, okay, we have this here in front of us. We have the system. It works, and it works good.
But didn't people like Nietzsche say that this was impossible, though? I mean, people like Nietzsche said that without some kind of, motivating metaphysical concept of your ideas being true, nobody's going to just stick to them for the fact that society says you should. I mean, that's an appeal to convention, totally.
I don't really think that's the case. I mean, take traffic lights. Everyone, or nearly everyone, stops at red. There is no divine plan telling people that they have to stop at red.
No, the law says you have to stop at red.
But the thing is, the people stop at red, not just because, it's like, yeah, they don't really want to get a ticket, because especially when there's no one there, like even when the street is empty, sometimes you see just people passing over red, but in the vast majority of cases, the people stop, even though there is no one there. And even though they know that there is no camera, they will still stick to it and they will still stop on red. And I don't think that is just because they're afraid of the law.
There's a certain amount of ethical, constraints on these things. But the thing is that, when you come to a norm, right, the norm has to have some basis to it. And if you can undermine it, and if you can say, oh, well, red isn't the objectively good way to do, stopping on red isn't the objectively best way to stop, to do these things, then you can kind of, flout the moral and subvert the entire system.
Yeah, but like traffic lights are super practical. They have a practicality to them. Overall,
it's also enforced by law practically too. So
yeah, but let's put the law aside for a moment. If you know that everyone will stop at red and you are quicker from A to B, if you listen to the traffic, or if you look at the traffic, you're very likely to stick to the rules. If you know that if you pass over at red, someone else will bump into your car and you don't want the car to be destroyed, that is a good incentive to not drive over red, no matter if there is a law or not.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though, and this is the fundamental problem. You just kind of alluded to it here, right? Most of the societal regulations we put around preserving our culture and preserving our way of life don't have an immediate consequence for the individual, like that traffic light example you just mentioned. If you flout the sexual norms, for the first few generations, you'll be perfectly fine. And especially if you're a male, you'll be perfectly fine flouting the sexual norms, right? And you'll have a huge advantage doing that. So there's a great amount of individual incentive to flout cultural norms and to essentially embrace relativism. And, it's
I wouldn't really say
horrible for the society overall, but for the short term, it's great.
I wouldn't really say so.
You don't think so?
No, because, like they have, I think you're living in the US, right?
I'm living in the United States, yes.
In the US, you have this problem that you have a lot of single mothers.
Yes.
They have a direct negative impact for the fact that they don't stick to, traditions. They themselves are impacted by it.
Oh, but who isn't impacted by it? The fathers that got them pregnant. And that's what, to a large degree, the societal prohibitions that were erected against single motherhood that existed prior to the 60s and then were destroyed in the 1960s, they were designed to essentially keep the fathers involved and to make sure that they took the share over, right? Because they essentially, most of these single mothers, they got pregnant with the intention that the man would stay with them and raise the child, and that never happened. And so you see that, for the individual man, hey, it's great, right? He can flout the social norm. He can question whether, is it really right to have to marry the person that you sleep with? Oh, I guess it's not, so he doesn't have to. And single mother, therefore. Society foots the bill, the woman fits the bill, and the individual who makes the decision not to stick with the family is liberated from that constraint. And you see, slowly your societal regulation degrades because no one believes in it.
So basically what you're saying is that you should not sleep with an American ever, because those guys just make you pregnant and run off. So what you're telling me.
What I'm saying, no, I'm pointing to the idea that so you have all these cultural norms, right? These cultural ideas of setting up society. What I'm saying is that to a certain degree, the regulation and enforcement of these laws has to be either through enforcement via the law or through a deeply held moral conviction or faith. And that once you get rid of this, as Nietzsche said in his books, eventually the standards will go away. And you see this
but
quite clearly
there
in
you have
sexual
there you have the
behaviors.
problem, because now it's like, you have to stick with the partner, right?
Yes.
You have to stick with the partner. And what do you do, for example, in households where there is violence? Because there it's a different problem. I don't think that the solution is just like, we insist on that kind of idea, we insist on the other kind of idea. I think it's much more valuable making people understand, even from young age on, why certain things are better for them personally. For example, if you take motherhood, and you talk to the women, it's like, use condoms and stuff like that, and use the pill, whatever. Take care of yourself, because if you end up in a situation where you can no longer take care of yourself because you have a child, you're locked up, and you will be financially in a situation of devastation, pretty much.
I don't know. It's just questionable to me whether you could say that every single societal regulation is necessarily the best for the individual who obeys that societal regulation. To me, that just seems manifestly false.
Well, but the thing is, it's a trade-off, because in Muslim societies, for example, they have this thing where you marry the woman, sleep with her, and then you just divorce her constantly. That's their way of prostituting.
And that is not really an anathema to Orthodox Christianity as practice. I'm sure there are some exceptions, but But anyway, go ahead. Yes.
The thing is, unless you understand, the basis underneath even a tradition, unless you understand why, as a father or whatever, you ought to stay with your family, unless you understand why, as a mother, it's good to not, sleep with 20 million people without condom, unless you understand the reasoning behind it, you will not really listen to it. Something that was very oddly common in the north of Italy was that the most religious girls were usually the ones who got, teenage pregnancies and the ones without husband. Partially because of the fact that, as I said, they tend to be drunk and go out a lot, but partially also because they had this religious upbringing that, you should not take care of yourself. You should not protect yourself. And if you have already this, this whatever sexual liberation, and you don't also put in this kind of, responsibility to the person, where it's like, hey, if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't take the pill, if you don't have an IUD, if you don't have anything like that, you will end up in trouble. If you don't have it both combined, you will end up in problems.
Yeah, but this is not in keeping with my experience. There are numbers of laws that people obey and they don't see the reason for them. When I was a child, I was told I shouldn't touch the stovetop, but I didn't understand that, well, that's because, there's electricity in the coils, and, if I turn the stove on, then it'll burn me. I didn't have the sophistication to understand that, right? And if you think about regulations, say, for instance, regulations concerning...
You listen to that?
I absolutely listened to my mother when she told me I shouldn't.
I'm sorry, but that is not the case with the vast majority of my family. I had a cousin who was touching the hot iron and was burning his hand. I myself had to be stopped at least 5 times from the hot stove until my grandfather took me over and held a hand right, above it for a couple of seconds, just to point out to me that it's hot.
You never learned anything until it was totally explained either through experience or first principle?
No, I just tended to not listen to and obey. I just
Maybe
tended
this
to not
particular
listen.
lesson you learned through experience, but most lessons children learn are because their parents told them not to do that, and they didn't do it before they understood why you shouldn't do it.
Can you repeat that?
So I find it very difficult to believe that you learned every single thing you currently now hold, either because you understood from first principle why it was incorrect, or because you literally did it and suffered a negative consequence. A lot of things we learn not to do.
Maybe I'm just the odd one out, but that is usually how I learned my lesson.
Okay, there's lots of things. You learn, for instance, you learn language before you understand the syntax of language, right?
What is the syntax?
Okay, so if I English, you probably learned this more better than I did. Actually, for English, you probably did learn the syntax, right? So if, in my first language, right, I learned that I need to say I am as opposed to I is. Like, I am a person as opposed to I is a person, right? Well, since English is my first language, I learned I'm a person is the correct way of saying it. Not because I understood, okay, well, you see, there's a verb and the verb is to be, and the verb conjugates I am in the first person, and they, he, she, it is in the third person, right? But I figured out how to speak the language before I understood how the language works. And what I'm saying is that's because I internalized the rules before I understood the reason for the rules.
Yeah, but if I can point out, you have a lot of foreigners who know very well English and partially correct the American locals, because even though Americans apparently learn all of these things, they tend to make mistakes overall.
No. I absolutely think that. It's always good to know the reasoning for things, right? But the thing is the central contention is can you learn to do something or not to do something before you learn why?
No, you can learn it. The question is it good? Is it useful? Because you can tell a child, don't touch this, right? And then you can tell a child, don't touch it, it's hot. Or you can, as some people did in the past, whack the kid with it. And so the kid learned, if I touch this, I get a slap on my face or something. And these are different approaches. I just think the approach where the child understands why it does it, it's the better one, because at the end of the day, it will stop the child from doing it in future.
Sometimes people can't understand why something shouldn't be done, right? Some people, there's some rules where people don't have the wisdom or the knowledge or the information to understand why it's a bad thing to do a certain thing.
Yeah, but if they don't have the knowledge and the understanding and a reasoning why they do or do not do certain things, how can they know that it is actually a bad thing?
Well, they can't know for certain, but they have the authority. They have it on good authority. For instance, I used to work at a factory, right? And whenever you had something dangerous going on, you tape around with red tape, right? So that, and the rule was you never enter an area that's taped off in red, right?
Yeah.
So I would come up to certain areas that I needed to get into. I looked into the area. It doesn't look like there's anything dangerous there. It looked like I could just go in and get the thing I needed, right? But there was red tape there, so I didn't enter it.
Yeah, but it makes perfect sense, though. If there is red tape, chances that there is a danger.
Well, why? I didn't understand why there was a danger there. I couldn't see the danger.
But you know that the tape has been put up because there is a danger.
And that's how rules work, right? The regulation is put there because somebody else knows there's danger. So regardless of whether you individually see whether there's a danger or not is irrelevant. You have the authority of your society and your culture. And people
but the point is, if you just see the red tape and you don't know the red tape is there because there is danger, then there is nothing stopping you from breaking the rule and going in through the tape anyway.
You know the red tape indicates danger. You can't see the danger. So would you break the red tape?
If you know that the red tape stands for danger, then you know the reasoning for it. But if you just say, red tape.
All you know is the red tape means danger. You do not know what the danger is, or even if there is a danger. All you know is that the person put it there was telling you, don't do this. Don't go in here. It's just like someone saying culturally, don't encourage people to have a large number of lifetime sexual partners. That would be an example.
You know what the funny thing is?
Mm-hmm.
I had probably the highest number of sexual partners of most people I know.
Mm-hmm.
And I am married, had no children outside of marriage. I'm happily married with a partner and have a healthy, happy child. And we raise it pretty much the traditional old style way.
That's excellent. That's great for you. But the thing is that most people don't have an experience.
The thing is, the only reason that worked out is because I knew why certain things are bad. If I wouldn't have known, I could have just as well ended up either with a teen pregnancy or with anything else.
I'm sorry, I don't want to intrude on your luck. Luck also would play a role.
Like in which sense?
So I don't really want to get involved in personal details, but sexual encounters carry with them risks that are just, even with precautions, are risks.
Yes, I know.
Okay, never mind. So for instance, I'll give you an example, right? When I was young, right, I did incredibly dangerous things driving. Like I sped on mountain passes, and I almost got into a car crash once when I went 60 miles around like a 20-mile bend, right? I ran my car off. I almost ran off a cliff.
Why didn't you stick to the law?
No, I got lucky, right? Like,
yeah, but why didn't you stick to the law? There was a law that society placed in place, and you didn't stick to it.
No, it wasn't a speed limited street even.
Well, even if it's not speed limited in per se, I'm pretty sure that you have a maximum limit of what you can drive on certain streets.
Was wise to do, and doing 60 on that street was physically dangerous, right? I did not have an accident because I got lucky, because I beat the odds. But if I were advising my children on what to do, I would tell them not to do that, because the next time someone does that, there's a high chance they would get into an accident. I guess I'm not making my point. Doing certain things has a high risk of a bad outcome. And just because certain people are very, very strong, very, very smart, or very, very lucky, or a combination of all three things, in the case of some behavior, right, does not, and then they actually come through unscathed, does not mean that behavior is a wise thing to do.
No, I agree. But the point is, if you were to come to me or to many people and just be like, just don't do this, that is not... I think it might be a bit of a cultural thing, because I remember, for example, my friend who was in a very, very strict household where the father was very, very strict. She had to be at home at, I think it was 9. Yes. She had to be at home at 9. So what she did is she came nicely home at 9, very, very nicely, very behavingly, brushed her teeth, put on her PG, went to sleep, waited until like 11, 12, until daddy was asleep, put on her party clothes, and climbed out the window.
Sure.
Because that was just the rule of the house. And she was like, if I don't get caught, who cares? If she would have understood the reasoning behind the rule, she would probably not have done so.
Yeah, and you should always make people understand the reasoning when they can understand the reasoning. But sometimes you have to make sure people have rules, even though they can't necessarily see the reasoning, I guess.
You know, I understand where you're coming from. I just think, personally, it is very important, as often as we can, to question what the reasoning is. Because some rules, for example, are in place that may have had a good reasoning in the past, may not necessarily have it now, because, you know, societies change. And so if we don't understand the reasoning behind it, chances are we could harm ourselves more than actually benefit us.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. That could happen, and that's something we have to be careful of. I mean, I sense that this is sort of the key to skepticism, the idea that you question everything, I guess, right?
You know, the thing is, I had so much negative experience, personal experience, with just taking things for granted, that I'm very skeptical about most of the things. You have to think, I was brought up, because in Italy, the school system is not separate from religion. Religion is part of the school. You go to school, you get religious upbringing, you know. In elementary school, they teach you, you know, there's like the Noah's Ark and all the nice fancy animals going on ship, and there you go. So that's part of the school system. I don't know if it still is or if they had to change it, but back in my days, it clearly was. And so when I learned about this God, because of the fact that, you know, I for some reason have a bit of a weird way of looking at things, because I was super into religion. I was really super into it. Yeah, let's go to church, you know, with grandma. It's super nice, super awesome. Guy was a bit boring, because half of the time I didn't even understand what he was saying, but that's a different story. So I was really into religion. And then I was, looking into, like, for example, the Bible and into certain things a bit more, focused. And I was like, you know what? That God guy is a horrible person. And so because, that just is taken for granted, that it's the good thing to be, pious and religious and whatever. What happened was that secretly, I tried to break every 10 commandments, or all the 10 commandments, every rule in that stupid book, just to make sure that secretly I could make, buddies with Satan, because I was super afraid of going to heaven.
Well, hopefully you didn't kill anyone.
No, I didn't, but I committed nearly suicide.
Oh, that's terrible. I'm really sorry to hear that.
Which is why I personally, and that is why I pointed out, is because I may have a lot of bias because of it, but I had very bad experience with taking things for the way they just say it. Because just because you say it's good or bad doesn't mean the people will actually pick it up that way.
No, absolutely. I think this is, this is something that people struggle with a lot, right? How do you deal with such an imperfect world and match that up to, a moral instinct that seems to be sort of beyond it, right? And how do you reconcile that with what we see in the world?
And the thing is, like, if you take traditions, there may be good reasons for certain traditions, but neither rules nor traditions nor anything else, because of the fact that humans are so hugely diverse, even on a small scale, they will never be perfect. There will always be fringe situations where rules are not good for those particular situations, right? And so the moment we go there and say, okay, this rule is just iron and this is just the way it is, we sort of, don't allow these edges there, these, gray areas to, sort it out a bit. The rules just don't work very clearly. You can say, yeah, this is the rule, this is the clear-cut rule. For example, let me think. I was listening into this hangout you had with the Sargon, just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
And you were talking about egalitarianism, right?
Yes.
And you were bringing up this, thingy with, everyone should be equal for the law, right? Where Sargon said, if you commit a crime...
That's the only egalitarianism I believe in. I reject egalitarianism otherwise.
No, I agree. I agree with that. But the point you made was very interesting. And you said, okay, now we discriminate in a... I don't know if you made the point or if Sargon made the point, but you said, I think, if I'm wrong, just correct me.
Yeah.
That's if you have people, for example, who are on drugs or otherwise, changed, emotionally, mentally, that a different standard applies to them. So they're not all equal in the law, or And just a while ago, there was this whole incident with this guy Amos Yee, who first he was in Singapore, and then he went to the US, and then he made all this, weird pedophilia, whatever videos, where he was arguing for that.
I remember him. He's that Asian guy from Singapore, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of been vaguely following him. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So and he came up with all this arguing, and he basically, like, when I hear him, right? Because when I talk about free speech, and for example, my partner Logic, he was defending the guy in Singapore. Even when he came with this whole, I don't know exactly what he said in Singapore that was pissing people off, but something along those lines of pedophilia as well. And he said, yes, this is stupid, it's garbage, but my idea is defend the fact that he's not supposed to get imprisoned for what he says. That was the basics, right? And then the moment he came to the US, where he can no longer be locked up for saying nonsense, there suddenly now Logic says, I don't have anything to do with this guy anymore, because he's free to say what he wants. If he wants to be stupid, that's on him, right? So so here you have an idea, right? That in its border was taken as an absolute, as an absolute idea. But even there, you have gray zones where, for example, it's like, at which point am I saying, okay, you know what, you're kind of telling this guy to kill this other guy. Maybe that should not really be allowed. Whether you call it free speech or not, at that point doesn't really matter anymore, because now you're inciting violence towards this person directly. And so, that you have this area where you can no longer stick to your principles. But that doesn't make the principle bad. It's just that in this area, it's no longer applicable.
Yeah, I mean, the principle, well, I mean, there's sort of a caveat. It's a gray area, right? It's
yeah. To
what degree is this bad opinion an act of protest against a government we don't like, right? Is it right to do things against oppressive governments that it wouldn't be right to do against governments that were legitimate, right? Or we saw as more legitimate, right?
The thing is, you can basically take everything as oppressive.
There's a lot of people who do just that.
If you look at some of the footage from Antifa, I mean, they're convinced they're living in Soviet Russia or something. Just not Soviet Russia, because otherwise they would probably be happy.
Soviet Russia?
Like the way they act, the way they behave, it's as if they think they're, under some kind of heavy regime that doesn't allow them to do anything, right?
Oh, you mean like modern progressives?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, modern progressives find our society in the West to be oppressive towards
them. So will you allow them to basically run up and just, get rid of the president? I would say no, because the president was elected. But then again, the way your system works is very questionable as well. So, I have a very huge problem, because there are a lot of ideologies who are competing with each other. Each single one of them has a few good things, but they're completely overshadowed by a horrible lot of bad things. And that is with tradition and traditionalist values, that is with modern values, that is pretty much with everything. And unless we actually have a good reasoning for why we believe certain things and why we stick to them, I don't think it's feasible for us to just stick to them.
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is always the question, right? I mean, when it comes to values, I mean, there's no like formalized process about how you decide which are the best values.
Yeah.
Outside of philosophical traditions, which a lot of people reject.
But even with philosophical traditions, like I don't know how often, but I had, because on Twitter I'm a nasty person, but on Twitter once in a while I have like this little dispute with a guy called Steve, not Steve Shives, another Steve, okay. And he comes up with this whole agnosticism ought to be different from atheism, because for him Gnostic atheist doesn't exist pretty much. Okay. But agnosticism is basically like a third whatever puzzle piece in there, where you have the theist, the atheist, and in the middle somewhere the agnostic. Yeah. Where you're neither theist nor atheist. So he has this idea, and he backs it up with philosophy, with the philosophy dictionary or whatever. And I reject it, because just because it stands in a book doesn't mean that it's actually valid, right? It would be much more helpful if, for example, a position like his would have basic reasoning behind it that helps people to work it out, like practical stuff. For example, with the, just like with the traffic light, it's good to follow the rules. Why? Because otherwise you trash your car. That is a good argument to convince people. And the main problem we have is, you can say traditional values are good, but you are not the person who has to be convinced. You have to convince people who have no connection to it anymore. And so you have to change the way to approach things in order for them to be convinced that what you do or what they ought to do is better for them.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, it could be better for, this is the thing though, with these values, right? There are some values that are not in the interest of the individual, but are only in the interest of society. Having children would be one of them. I mean, most people do not get back the money they put into having a child. But if everyone didn't have children, then society would crumble. If everyone didn't have, on average, 2 children, society would crumble.
But aren't we like completely overpopulated?
Well, some countries are.
Like, and I agree with you.
If Sweden solves its population, if Italy solves its population problem by replacing Italians with Nigerians, then you might have a point. But if Italian does not want to replace its population with Nigerians, Italian society is going to at some point have to have Italian children to replace the citizens that die in the previous generation.
Yeah. No, but there I'm sorry, but if there wouldn't be so many Nigerians, Italians would have more children. The vast majority of people cannot necessarily afford it anymore. I mean, we had in the north of Italy, in certain provinces, we had a 50% unemployment rate for everyone who was under 25, 30. I mean, that's heavy.
No, it's heavy, certainly. But you think, I don't know. I mean, people had children before. I mean, I don't see how the presence of, to me, it seems more like a problem inside the culture of Italy and the culture of the West. Probably not necessarily a problem with cultures that are having a lot of children.
No, because Italy is not a country that wouldn't have children if not for the fact that they cannot really afford them. Because they're into children, at least as far as I could tell. Most of the people I know, who have a partner, who are married, would love to have children. They just cannot afford it.
Yeah, there are barriers. I'll give you that. There are economic barriers that we've erected in front of having children. I still think that there's just less will in having children, and there's less societal pressures to get people to have them too.
Yeah, but there is another thing, which is because I did go through this whole having children and so on, and I think we approach this the wrong way. If you want people to have children, then you have to make it tasty, in a sense, to them to have children, and not be like, oh no, it's horrible that you don't have children. If you want society to have children, you have to set up a basis for them to want to have children, or you just won't get people to have children. If because of the fact that I cannot, if because of the fact that I get a child, then I have, I don't know, health issues, or I have financial issues, or I have any other kind of issues, right? For example, we had this instance with our family, for example, because we stick to one child. The reason we stick to one child is primarily health, right? So I got in a situation where I kind of was forced into a particular, way of getting my child, and pretty much, that's standard, and that's what you do. And I didn't really have much choice. As a result, I had a lot of, injuries, in a sense, and I do not wish to have a second child because of the damage the first child did. If I would have had the choice, for example, to get a C-section or have other options, I probably would have wanted a second child, even with the mess we had. On top of that, the whole maternity-paternity leave, I personally think, is a bit messed up, because why on earth is it that you have maternity leave, if at all, that is such a short period, and then you have paternity leave that is basically inexistent, where if both people would be able to take at least a partial time off, where they wouldn't have a malus financially, probably they would be more into having children already, because the stress level is so much lower. And these are all little things where you can incentivize people to get more children or to have more children, where we're just like, no, you ought to have children, but we won't give you any, goodies for it.
Oh, I totally agree that we should have more child support, more maternity leave. I guess I'm a little bit skeptical that this is the reason why people are having less children, because if that were the case, people would be having more children in Europe, but they have more children in America.
No, that's not my argument. My argument is not that we ought to, my argument is, this is the situation we have. The people are not into getting children, right? I think the better approach would be, okay, we want people to have more children. How can we incentivize them to have children? How can we give them the positivity about having children? What makes them like to have children more? And then work our way on that. If we are just like, we ought to have more children, we will not solve the problem. I'm not thinking about the problem which exists. And partially, I think it's because of materialism, because people are so into stuff nowadays, especially in the west of Europe.
I think you're right.
They're
I think
so into stuff. They don't really have this connection anymore with certain things that, and because of the fact they don't have the connection with it, they kind of don't even know that it's missing,
It seems like, I think you really hit on this. Materialism seems to be the problem, right? But this is sort of what I was trying to get at, right? That when you have a materialist worldview, when the only thing you see is yourself and your own interests, how can you stop people from being materialist if the only kind of ethical guidance and view of the world is simply self-interested? If we're not going to be materialist, doesn't that mean we have to value something that's not material?
Yeah, but the thing is, you can still have a self-centered and selfish kind of worldview, and still, like, for example, a lot of people who have children, because they're stressed and because both parents have to work and bring the kid here, go to work, go to school, and so on.
I understand it's really hard.
For example, they have stress, right? They have a lot of stress built up, and they're frustrated, and you as a new person who is freshly married, you see that and you're like, am I really doing this to myself, right? So it's already a bad setup.
Whereas I agree that there's a material component, but I think weren't towards the end of that conversation, didn't you kind of allude to the fact that it was also because people had cultural values that led them towards materialism?
But the thing is, I don't think that I say that materialism is partially the problem, because people have all the stuff idea. They want stuff, but you say you cannot have secular ideas that bring people back to wanting something else.
Well, yeah, I'm actually curious. Well, I don't know if you can't.
And I think that is incorrect.
As a secular person, do you have a concept of what would motivate somebody to want something other than stuff and materialism?
But
that you particularly like?
The thing is, again, I have to step back and put out a caveat, because I had personal experiences, and that doesn't count as statistics. I had the situation.
Just your theory, right? Just whatever you think would be the better way to do it, right?
Yeah, it's put a caveat to it, put an asterisk to it.
Perfect, fine, yeah.
When I was young and I was sticking to all those rules, I felt miserable. Genuinely miserable, suicidal. In fact, I tried it 3 times. I failed 3 times. My mindset about this is kind of crappy, so I will not, waste time on this. But the reason I changed was because first I completely, basically threw everything over. I was just like, forget all the rules, forget everything. I'm gonna go do what I want. And then I was, looking into every single thing that I believed in or I did before, because people told me that it's the good thing to do. And I figured out why it's good and why it's bad. And the moment I did this, I actually learned to enjoy certain things. And for example, I had a huge luck, because I was just, I basically snatched away the old car of my uncle, because he had this hugely old Golf and he wanted to buy a new car, and he didn't want to, throw it away, because that costs money. So I was like, you know what, give it to me. For a couple of bucks, you give it to me.
Yeah. Nice little cars.
I love the old Golfs. They just keep ages and a half. That thing was just as old as I was, and it was just driving like majestically. 20-year-old car driving better than the new car the guy bought. His own fault. But so I had this super old car, and I was like, good. Now, studies didn't work out that well, because it was just too much, working and studies and constantly visiting parents every weekend. That was just way too much. Traditions, you're welcome. I'm taking my car and I'm driving off to Warsaw. I don't know why I was that crazy, because I didn't speak a word Polish back then, but yeah. So I drove to Warsaw, and I had zero. I had nothing. And that experience has completely changed me. Completely, because if you have nothing, then you cannot value anything. I mean, sure, I had the car and I was super happy that, at least I could pull up the windows and didn't get eaten by the mosquitoes. Or, when it was frozen cold, at least I had the place that wasn't that windy. But overall, except of the car, there wasn't much else. So I had to find a job in a place where I couldn't speak the language. I had to, dig my way through. Partially, I was, going through the garbage and stuff. And then I started to communicate with people who didn't have anything. And that kind of experience, if you smoke weed, that's nothing like what I did. Zero. And these kind of experiences make people want to have a different point of view. But because we're living in this materialistic world where we don't even have to interact with people, and we don't get these experiences, we are just completely deprived of it.
So you think that experiences of privation are sort of the key to getting an anti-materialist worldview, or this particular experience helped you value something that was beyond just pure materialism?
Well, it helped me, and I think partially it's also the mindset, because if you're stuck in a particular mindset, if you're stuck in a particular worldview because society, has dragged you along into this worldview, it is very hard for you to imagine another kind of worldview. So if you would take yourself out of that particular place and go somewhere that is completely different, even if you have some money, even if you have some, just don't take too much, but, take your money and go for a year, I don't know, go to Warsaw, go to Poland, go to some place where you just don't understand anything and anyone, and where you kind of have to figure things out by yourself. You do this once, and even if you don't necessarily like the experience, it will give you the ability to broaden your mind and to understand other people and other thinking. And that will allow you to look at things much more openly and more critically and see what the good and the bad about it is. Because without that, you're kind of, locked in.
Well, I guess, but you're specifically saying this will help you develop values that are not simply focused on your own well-being, but are focused on intergenerational well-being or societal well-being or
spiritual well-being? The moment you have nothing and all you have is, talking to people a bit and, trying to figure things out, the moment stuff is not your focus, and cannot be your focus, you have to find another focus, even just for the time being. And that experience alone at least makes you open to the idea that having other values and having other focuses may advance, may make you feel better, because it does. I have talked with a lot of people who had the experience of traveling around a lot and talking to many people, even in ghettos and stuff. And the vast majority of those people were like, this is the experience that just really made life worth it, because it is such a different experience and they have no idea about it. You sit in your house, everyone tells you, you get your, white picket fence, housey, you work off your mortgage, stay in the same job for I don't know how many years, and there you go. And many people are just not really happy with that. A microwave doesn't make you happy. And if you're not happy with a microwave, something is wrong. You have to find another way to be happy. And unless you know that you can actually just, cut out and just try something completely different, you will stay stuck in that system and just be like, that's just the way it is. And then everything will crumble.
No, so I guess the privation and the independence and the sort of need for community is that's the key in your mind, or in your opinion, I guess.
And also think about it like this: you have a couple of people, a couple of groups of minorities who are basically stuck in welfare. It's like, okay, we cannot do anything about our well-being, our life, or anything. We're just stuck this way.
And do you think they have a greater? Do you think people living in the welfare system have a better grasp on non-materialist values than do your average middle class people?
No, because they too are stuck in a system, in a very narrow system.
I guess maybe I don't understand. Don't they have more privation though?
But that's not really the point, though. The privation is not the point. The outer experience, the experience where you don't have stuff involved, is the point. Because not having stuff doesn't mean you don't want stuff.
Yeah, it seems almost like what Buddhists or Christians might call a spiritual retreat.
Except it's not spiritual. It's a different experience.
Yeah, it's a different word to describe the same thing, though, right?
Yeah. No, but like, I don't know. Have you ever read, I don't know. Have you ever listened to some of Sam Harris's stuff?
Yeah, all the time.
And he's really into like this whole drug experience. And the reason he's into that is because it gives you a different view on the world. And I think he's a bit misguided, because that is not what makes experience good. What makes experience good is knowing that that is not the only way to go. So I would not say go for drugs. I would say, go for a foreign country where you don't know the culture and don't speak the language.
Well, sure. I think you finding these, I guess, if we don't want to say spiritual, we can call them non-materialistic experiences, can come from any number of places where you're sort of forced to escape the rest of the world where you deal your, or I mean, I hate to say it, but this is what most people seek when they worship, right? When people worship in religions, what they're doing is they're seeking to bring themselves into a space where
they're basically trying to get high. But even there, I personally was going to church. I was, doing all this stuff, but I never really had this.
No, but I'm not saying you personally did it. I'm saying that's what people who enjoy going to church find in church. They find this non-materialistic experience that you talked about, where that you discovered in Warsaw.
Yeah, but the thing is, can we build, because now we have a society that gets more and more secular. And I think I have told this to a couple of my atheist friends, and they don't quite grasp it. And I think it's partially because I had a very different past than they had. Mm-hmm. I think that it is paramount for us as a society to find a way to make people get these kind of experiences, to, encourage them to do, I don't know, a year out, a year completely somewhere different, make a charity year, go somewhere, live in Africa or something.
But will it always be found in a year out? Some people might, will it always be found? Will this non-materialist experience always be some kind of sort of like retreat away from, or a retreat away from the society you live in? Might not some people find this in an interior space?
Also, but the thing is, as a society, right now, we do not have anything encouraging this kind of thinking. We don't have anything except of maybe alcohol and cigarettes and that kind of stuff. And and the people who are religious, they go to church.
I actually think that's absolutely true. I mean, we've lost the capacity to seek these things because in my I think we've lost interest in these things as a society, I mean, maybe some people have a hard time finding these things inside a worship.
Yeah, but most of the people don't even know they're missing. I had even religious people, super religious people who are all into like this whole Jesus stuff and everything, who had no idea what I was talking about. People just don't even know it's missing, and it drives me nuts.
Some people don't understand. Well, yeah, but I mean, sometimes you would be surprised, right? Sometimes you encounter people who are superficially very materialist, and that's what they show to the outside world. But on the inside, they have very deep spiritual experiences. And it's hard to see from the person on the outside what their real spiritual life is on the inside, right? Like you were just saying, right? You're a completely different person in an environment where we're contemplating about things than you are, say, on Twitter, right? And the same thing might be true for your average person who you're like, they're just like these materialistic, phony Christians. Well, maybe there's a side to them that we're not seeing, right?
The thing is, I would agree with you, except the vast majority of people who talk to me one-on-one, because this is all one-on-one stuff. I'm super into how do you think? Right? I don't necessarily, when I have a Christian who comes to me and tells me, the earth is 6,000-year-old. Years. If a Christian comes to me and says, the world is, English is horrible. Jesus. Okay, the world is 6,000 years old.
Yes.
God, just give me a sec. Give me a sec.
No, go for it.
What was I saying? Before anything else, I want to know, how did he come to this conclusion, right? How does he think? Mm-hmm. That is the thing that really fascinates me. That is the thing that really gets to me. That's, there are people who have their spiritual enlightening when they go to church. I get fascinated by seeing how diverse people can think. And so I have a huge incentive in being as nice and kind in private as I possibly can, just to get to this. In public, I will, play the jester.
Yeah, we all do on YouTube. Yeah, I understand what you mean.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, because sometimes people get really upset. And I'm thinking by myself, I'm so sorry, but I just won't change it just for you. I'm still being a jester. That's just my job. But,
No, I get it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
But in private, because I have a lot of people who just come to me and just start talking, right? And I ask them questions and I let them talk, and then I make a couple of like pokey questions just to figure out how they think. Because you have a lot of people who are stuck in a mindset that they actually don't even approve of, and they don't know that they don't approve of it. And so the moment you poke them enough, suddenly they have this huge enlightenment where they're like, you know what, I've never thought about this. And then suddenly you have a completely different person in front of you, right? And this kind of things happen so often that I agree. You know, people may be materialistic on one side and not materialistic on another side, but I really think that many people never ever get out of their box, and that is a huge problem, no matter if it's materialistic or just traditionalist or anything else.
No, I think that's what people should do. They should seek out conversations. I think a lot of times people feel like that the conversations will make them lose sight of the spiritual direction they're pursuing. And, you know, I think there's less danger of that than people oftentimes assume superficially, right? And I think that, but this is an interesting thing. I think we've seen sort of a linkage of a lot of different topics, right? We've seen the linkage of sort of like a non-materialistic value that people need to have to really live life to the fullest. And we see that's sort of combined with trying to find an understanding of what our responsibility is to, say, generations that we'll never see.
Yes.
And I think exploring the combination of those two things is really what I'm interested in doing, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that when I see some place like, well, Sweden, not to put too fine a point on it, it seems like I see a society that's really lost both of those things, and it manifests itself in this sort of this self-hatred of their own culture. And I think that, you know, exploring this spiritual question is really key to addressing why that's going on, because it's so fascinating why it's going on, right?
Yeah, but that's the weird thing about it. People don't even question it. It's like your society goes and brittles and you don't question it. What's going on, you know?
Yeah.
You just see that things go bad and you're upset that they're bad, but you don't really question why or what you should change. And then you have this huge disconnect between the high society, you know, the politicians and everything else, and the lower class, where the people firsthand experience what it's like to be in a very different environment and in a hostile environment in part. And they have absolutely no power. So they have, on top of that, partially, at least that's the impression I got, they also have this kind of, you know, they have this giving up in them, where they're like, you know, I want the change, but I don't even have a party to vote for that will give me the change. And then you see the polls that come in from Europe, where it's like 55% of the population wants, you know, immigration to stop, and yet you hear the politicians, we have just a few racists who just want immigration to stop, and I'm thinking that's such a huge disconnect there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, and this is the question: is what ideal is sort of at the heart of this problem, and it's kind of what I've been trying to figure out with my channel. But I think we're kind of coming up on time. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss? We could probably do. Let me take some questions from the chat.
Just because I know there are a lot of people who are like, you know, we have to bring religion sort of kind of back. There are those kind of people. And I think that is the wrong approach. I think what we have to do, first and foremost, is we have to give, we have to take the society as it is, know its language, learn its language, and then find a way to get them to feel spirituality in the way they know it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
How would that be different than religion? That just seems like a different word for religion.
Well, no, it's not religion, though, because in religion you have a set dogma that gets you to the point of being spiritual.
Well, dogma just means, doesn't dogma just mean teaching?
Well, isn't dogma what you believe without evidence?
I mean, it's just a principle or a tenet. I mean, you can have evidence or it does not have evidence. I don't think lack of evidence is built into the definition of dogma.
We have a society where the vast majority of people, you know, have been brought up with the whole, you know, things have to have, you know, reasoning behind it. Things have to, you know, scientifically make sense, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that is not a bad approach. That is actually a good approach because it gave us a lot of advantages. But what we cannot forget.
But these aren't scientific questions we're asking right now.
No, but you know, the point is you get to the point where those two clash together. You get to the point where you have the dissecting.
Why do you have to?
Thingy. You have the dissecting, you know, nature who wants to dissect everything, and there is stuff I want to dissect the stuff, and there is ideas and I want to dissect ideas. That's a way of thinking, you know. You want to like get to the core of it. You want to
Why
dissect
can't
stuff.
I don't understand why you can't do both.
Because they're mutually exclusive.
Wow. Demonstrate it.
If you have the tendency to dig into stuff and to dissect stuff.
Sure.
And on the other hand, you have this kind of, this is, a way of feeling, spiritual, and this is a dogma that I believe in.
Well, that like the one you stated, right? About discovering the non-materialistic values while you were in Warsaw, right?
Yeah, but I discover non-materialistic values, right? That doesn't make them divine. That doesn't make them transcendental.
No one said anything about divine. We're saying that this is a non-scientific question, and you're saying somehow that it seems like you're saying at least that we can't answer these questions.
I don't say we cannot. I say that they're not, like, everything is a tool. Spiritual experiences is a tool. It's a tool to make you feel better.
Sure. What I'm saying is, why can't you have spiritual experiences and science? Why do they have to be mutually exclusive, like you just said?
No, you can mix them as long as you keep in mind that you have to have a basis for what you believe that can be dissected and is still solid, because otherwise the society collapses.
You said yourself when you started your story that it wasn't scientific and it was just your experience.
Yes, that is my experience. But
so you can have that experience and that spiritual belief, and it does not interfere with your ability to do science, right? I mean, that's sort of the conclusion of what you're just saying here.
Okay, maybe we should clarify a couple of terms.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about dogma, and I don't know if I use the word correctly, when I talk about dogma, I talk about preset beliefs, God, Jesus, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There is a framework in which people have spiritual experiences or whatever. When I say spiritual, I simply mean a personalized experience, that has emotions, that has, I don't know, hormonal outflow, whatever, call it what you will. That is what I call spiritual. That has nothing to do with dogma, in my personal view, but I may completely butcher the words here. I just don't know how else to use them. So when I say I had these experiences, then these experiences tell me that there is a possibility that you can value other things. It doesn't tell me what to value. It just says there is a possibility that you can. And that is the door that you have to open. If you come with a framework,
subsequently there'll be a valuing as something non-material, right?
But if you come then with a framework and you say, like, this is, whatever, divine revelation. If you come with this kind of dogmatic framework and you put that on top, then you will have a lot of people who will discard it, who will not allow these kind of, sensations, because they're like, dogma is irrational. Therefore, these kind of sensations are irrational. And that is the wrong approach.
Well, I don't know. It doesn't seem like the religious approach and what you're describing is all that different, I guess. It differs in the words you apply to it, right? I mean, in religion, it's more organized, but it's essentially a way of organizing what you're describing, experiencing in your individual life, right?
Yeah, but I think my main problem with dogmas, or religion in particular, is you don't just have the people try to induce experiences. You also have a lot of rules and regulations attached.
Well, the rules of how you can replicate these things, right? Like, for instance, you were just saying how you thought everyone should go out and try to have these experiences in order to come to similar conclusions. Well, a lot of the religious rituals we have are similar spiritual masters having these experiences and going, oh, okay, well, if you do this, it could be very positive, right? It's the same. It's a similar kind of argument.
Yeah, but then you have also the people who are like, try to meditate. Where meditation has absolutely no God, no Jesus, no anything involved. Sure. Obviously, you can go Buddhistic or whatever.
There are lots of different ways to do this, right?
Yes, and what I'm trying to say is we have to focus on the experience and tell people, you know what, it doesn't matter. This experience is real for you. This is a real experience. You have it. It's an emotional experience, but it's not connected to any kind of dogma. Because the moment we split those two, we have the chance to get this kind of emotional, need of people into the society again. If we stick to it has, divine whatever to it, or it has, I don't know, whatever spiritual nonsense to it, if we stick to that, there will be a lot of people who will discard it a priori before even trying it, because they don't understand that you can actually split those two.
Well, I mean, anyway,
you don't have to, but you can. And as long as people understand that you can, and you should try it either way, I think that's a good way to go.
I guess it seems to me that you're going to be kind of, I mean, regardless of how you try to teach people how to obtain non-materialistic values, it seems like, people will identify this as some kind of dogma by your definition.
Yeah, but, I don't agree. When I say I have this kind of experience, try it out. It may work for you, it may not work for you. Try it out. Then I'm just telling you, okay, there was a person who had an experience, an emotional experience, an experience that, helped that person develop. You may try it. It may work for you, it may not work for you, but there is nothing attached to it. There is no, how should I say this?
But can I remind us of something? We were talking about how these values might operate on a societal-wide scale. So to kind of offer the solutions we sort of set out to discuss, right, about societal cohesion and about how people can value intergenerationally non-materialistic goods that they'll never consume. We were talking about something that everyone in the society would value in common. And because of that, there's a need to have sort of somewhat similar experiences in this regard.
Yes and no, but the experience, or the kind of experience, it's nice if it is similar or the same, or if people get to it in a certain way. But at the end of the day, it's just the experience that counts, and not how you get to the experience. And so, if as a society we value that, and you were talking about how this is not self-centered, how this is not something personal, how this is not related to your own well-being, but for example, the people who meditate know it is good for their own well-being. It makes them feel better. So there is a personal good to it, which does not require any kind of, original, traditional, transcendental value. But the value that we want to get into people is to value the fact that they like it, even though it is not material, and that is allowed, because right now it is not.
Okay, I mean, I don't know. This is an interesting discussion. Perhaps we're a little bit out of time, but maybe we can take it on some other time. I still feel like we're describing two types of the same thing, and what we're really dealing with is not so much describing two things, but rather whether we're describing the framework of how we deal with it, and how much we can build on the work done by previous generations and the work done by Christians and perhaps Buddhists.
Maybe if I come up with a little, how should I say, a little story, quote unquote. Take Venice. Venice is a city on top of wooden pillars. The Venice city is about to basically crumble, because the pillars sink, because the pillars are just not that good. They're wooden, and eventually they go old, and the ground is not very solid either. So, you have people like, social justice warriors who would be like, take off the pillars, they damage the environment anyway, let the bloody city sink. And then you have the traditionalists who are like, no, we have to stick to those pillars, and they're so necessary, because otherwise the city will sink. And I'm like, the city sinks either way, because the society changes. And so what you have to do is you get another kind of material or something else, you put it underneath and push it back up, that is not wood, such that even though the current city is about to drown, with the new material and the new build-up, it can stick where it is. That's
but isn't that the most important thing? Isn't the most important thing the new material you put into that system? I mean, this is sort of my main interest in the skeptic community. I don't really care about how you don't think the current pillars are working. I care about what you want to replace them with in this analogy. Yes. Right. And I get like a lot of, I mean, it's nice, and I agree with what you said in this stream, right? But to me, it's also really vague. I mean, it's also something that it seems that a lot of the skeptic community has not spent a lot of time discussing or talking about or even thinking about, right? And I'm hoping that perhaps, maybe we could have, I'm running out of time here a little bit, but maybe we can talk about this more or something.
I can come. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, so that's sort of my main contention, right? That I think that, really what skeptics should do, in my opinion, right, is define themselves by what they want to actually replace the pillars with, right? Be Dadists, not skeptics, right?
Are tools. Skeptics are tools.
No, I understand everything about what skeptics isn't, but what I'm curious about is the replacement, right?
Yeah, no, you want it replaced, and it makes perfect sense. And the thing I'm telling you is, because obviously, I am vague because I don't really, first of all, I have a bit of a language barrier, and also I didn't really think about it too much myself because there are not many people who like to talk about it because it's a bit of a taboo.
For instance, to borrow your analogy, right, with the whole Venice is sinking thing, a traditionalist would say, Venice isn't sinking because the pillars are bad. Venice is sinking because the pillars were removed. And they were explicitly removed by secularist movements throughout the 20th century.
Well, no, they were corroded. They weren't removed, they were corroded.
Oh, no. I mean, there were people who explicitly tried to get anti-Christian and non-Christian things taught in schools. This was an explicit project.
Interesting.
But that's a huge debate. We'll agree to disagree on that, but I'm just putting forward the perspective that a traditionalist would have, right? And so I think
okay, let me say it like this.
Sure.
The wooden pillars, no matter if you, have them and put them back, will not keep up the city. You have to put in something that is a bit more stable because otherwise the people who are on Venice will sink with the rest because the pillars won't hold the weight.
And I'm desperately interested in what that stronger thing is. I want to see that stronger positive thing that will hold up the city in your analogy, right? And that's what I'm really, really interested in on this channel,
Can you hear me still?
Yeah. So I'm really, really interested in that stronger thing that will hold up the city, right?
Yeah.
That is the thing, right? Not the fact that you don't like the wooden pillars. What's the thing is the stronger pillars.
Yes, I absolutely agree. We have to find better pillars.
Okay. Well, I'm all out of time, but thank you so much for appearing.
It was very interesting.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation. I really loved your story about going to Warsaw. That was really, I felt like I had a very similar experience, and I thought you really told it beautifully.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, guys. I think we're just going to end the stream and not do the chat.
Sorry about that.
Thanks again for coming on the channel, Iseth, and I hope to see you around online, okay?
Okay, bye. It was nice. Thank you.
Bye. See ya.